All right. Well, Joey, I am very glad that you are here today. Thank you very much. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah.
Now, what these meetings are designed for specifically is to go over the course material. And what I wanted to do is kind of talk about how each module will look going forward, what's expected of everybody. And I want to introduce something, a new project idea I came up with. Got some little bit of feedback. I want to get yours on it. And this is not to replace any projects, and nobody's required to do it. This is just an option for another discovery project. It's an AI project. I'm just really excited about it.
Cool.
And then I wanted to talk about the weekly reflections a little bit and what that is, and just go over stuff like that. And what I really appreciate is you've taken several classes from me. So, and what it might be a little bit awkward is most of the people watching this are not going to be able to understand our shorthand because of that. So please don't get upset if I back up and go slower. And if you think we're going too fast, remind me for other people too.
Okay.
Because you and I, we could be all done with, say, okay, well, look at this, watch these videos, do your reflection, let me know what you think, and then we're done. So, but we can't do that. All
Okay.
right. So I am, okay, I've got everything. We're saving this meeting. It looks like everything's good. So let's fingers crossed it all works out. All right. So I did the welcome video to uh, the art history class last week, recorded that for everybody to watch. Um, this class is specifically Renaissance to contemporary, which means essentially 1350 AD to today. And which we're going to cover a lot of ground. We are going to bounce around a bit. We may go back and forth in time a little bit. One thing that I've noticed is that a lot of the times when we look at art history, an assumption is made that Europe is king and everything before Europe needs to feed into Europe. Everything after Europe needs to feed from Europe. And I think that's really unfair because people have lived every spot on the planet that has at some point liquid water has pretty much hosted human habitation. And the liquid water doesn't even have to be standing water. It can be water that people melted down in order to survive, but and we can see that like with just like cave paintings and stuff are everywhere. And I read something just this summer, an ethnographer was talking about how many people have inhabited this continent over the last 50,000 years. And they said there's a good chance anywhere you decide to put your foot, at least 10 other people have already stepped there, regardless of where you are, and maybe thousands. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous. And then just a little while ago in New Mexico, they found footsteps of human beings that are at least 20,000 years old. And they think they could be even older than that, but they can date for sure that they're at least 20,000 years old. Just footsteps of human beings. So I just think that that's amazing. My friend Lacey, who was the Native American church pastor for the Ute Nation, he said that one thing people don't understand is that his people were not the first here. They're just the present caretakers because there's always people that came before and there will always be people that came after. And I like that kind of perspective. But all that being said, we're not going to be talking just about European stuff. We are going to start with that, with the Renaissance. That's going to be our hinge point. But we're going to be looking as much as we can for contemporaries around the planet. And generally, it's going to be stuff that looks like it's responsive to Renaissance, because when we look at before the Crusades, uh, the peak of travel technology was the Vikings. Before that, it was the Phoenicians, basically. And when we hit the Crusades, all these European communities that are being told that they need to go and liberate the Holy Land at the develop all these travel technologies and communication technologies that are leagues ahead of what anybody else saw in their communities for the previous 1,000 years, easily, starting about 1098. And then if we go to the world of Islam at about the same time, with the growing consumer base of people in the Muslim empires, they started doing the same kind of thing. So while the Crusades are going on in the West, in the East, the Muslim empires are expanding, and they started trading up and down the coast of Africa and all, over to Korea. A friend of mine is an art historian. He used to work at the Met. Yeah, really good friend. I don't know where he's working now, but he was able to show that Chinese pottery at about this time was heavily influenced and dramatically changed because of the market influence of the Muslim empires. So all this and all this comes to a head at the end of the Crusades. This is at a time when people are thinking, we've had enough of war. War's been going on for about 10 generations at least. And how can we use these new technologies to essentially make money while we live together? And I think that was, you can make the argument that was the impetus for what became the Renaissance. And so and that's why it is, I think, Eurocentric, because the Renaissance, they brought together all these Muslim technologies that were developed, all these older technologies, Viking technologies, all this stuff was brought together to create what a couple generations later became called the Age of Exploration. When people were able to finally figure out both latitude and longitude on the ocean, using a cross between Muslim technologies and the astrolabe and Viking technologies with their essentially it's photoreactive crystals that they used to determine where the sun was, and different things like that, in spite of all the um, uh, hallucinations and oddities that you get while you're traveling on the ocean sometimes. Uh, these two technologies coming together, plus all the stuff that had been developed through the Crusades, created this an explosion of technology that made the world very suddenly a very small place. Um, in 1098, 1096, when the first Europeans started going through Turkey into North Africa and the Middle East for the Crusades, they get in Constantinople and see a building, the Hagia Sophia, that is so big the Statue of Liberty can stand up inside of it without the torch touching the ceiling. This building is so huge, there are accounts, 1,000 years ago, of people claiming to see clouds inside. Can you imagine people from Europe who lived and died within 5 to 10 miles of where they were born and had done that for 1,000 years, suddenly seeing a building that is easily 1,000 times bigger than anything they had ever seen or heard about before? And then they come back. They keep going, and nobody believes them. The next generation goes to Turkey, goes to the Crusades, comes back, nobody believes them. And finally, all this, people are realizing it is possible. They don't have the knowledge, but they start using math, they start using geometry to develop that knowledge, draw from all this material. They're getting books for the first time in centuries. They're being able to travel back and forth several times in a single lifetime and learn from these people. And that coming together all helped to make what became the Renaissance. And I think the reason why it's pivotally important that it is Europe is because those technologies were centered in Europe. That's where a lot of the money was. And they were the guys that were really interested in exploring everywhere. At least, I'm not going to say that. They were interested and wrote about it the most, published it the most, because China was too. They did a lot of exploration about this time too. There's even maps from about the same time as the Crusades of uh, the Sea of Cortez and Baja California. And it looks like there is a wall that was built in Southern California that matches architecture in some of the places of the Great Wall of China that was built at about this time, which, is supposed to be 500 years earlier than uh, anybody was supposed to have communicated between China and North America. But anyway, all that stuff aside, so it's fascinating to me the kind of stuff that's going on, and that's why I love getting into the Renaissance. Um, we're going to talk really quickly about three ideas that I touch on in the 2710 class that we don't really talk specifically about in this class, but I wanted to touch on those ideas just anyways. Um, let's see, I'm going to share my screen really quick here. Okay, is this, oh, wait a sec. All right, Joey, can you see this? Okay. The reason I was dribbling on about all that leading up to this is that it's really kind of important. It is important to understand where the Renaissance fits. And the three ideas that I want to touch on are semiotics, artifacts, and the third is um, symbolism. These are really important. Whenever we're looking at art from anywhere in the world, those three things are really important. Semiotics is uh, when we generate meaning through associations, like placement and context, things like that. For example, if you see a ring of stones in the desert, it just is a ring of stones. But if you see a ring of stones and in one area you see the stone, there's a part in the ring of stones that's maybe about 2 feet wide. And on the far side of the ring of stones on the inside, you see this little pit with what looks like ashes in there. What kinds of things are you starting to think of? What could that possibly be?
Think of a like a fire pit.
Yeah, it could be a fire pit. And this is possibly a home. But the reason we come to those conclusions is because of our associations with that physical context. It makes us think of those kinds of things. And so when we're looking at, for example, paintings, and we see maybe one painting is on a small thing that is big, small enough to fit in somebody's bag and or to carry with them. And then we see another painting that is maybe 8 feet on a side. And maybe we can conjecture that the gigantic painting is maybe a prestige item that fits in a welcoming hall of a big building, like a city building or a castle, in order to awe and inspire people. So it's painting specifically done for strangers or to intimidate. But the small thing that's, looks like it might be worn, looks like it belonged in a bag or something like that, maybe that's a more personal item. And so it would make sense that that small painting was of a person that was close or important to the individual carrying it around. Or maybe it's a figure of a saint or something like that. And the large painting, it could be of an historical event or something of really powerful religious significance. And we can make arguments like that might be supported because maybe those things did belong in those kinds of spaces. There's a good chance that a painting 8 feet on a side is not going to be carried around in anybody's saddlebags. And there's a good chance that a little teeny thing that looks like it belongs in a bag is not going to be used to show off to anybody. And when then the next idea is artifacts. And artifacts are pretty much in the context of art history and what we're talking about, it's pretty much anything that shows evidence of human activity or involvement. So, in this context, an artifact, like a human bone, may not be an artifact unless it was worked on. If it was broken somehow, or if it was wired together into something else. Like the ossuary chapels that we see in Eastern Europe have a lot of human bones that are wired together to make these scenes out of sometimes paintings, more often biblical stories, or uh, different settings or scenarios that were important to the families paying for these kind of ossuary chapels. And but I think that that's the difference between having a bone, if it's a human bone with holes drilled in it and a little bit of dust or uh, rust in the hole, then we can make the assumption that maybe this was used for something specific and it is an artifact. But when it's just like an ankle bone found in the middle of a desert somewhere, maybe it's just an unlucky traveler. And then the third idea is the idea of symbolism. And symbolism is essentially, it boils down to anything that references something else. And most often in art, symbolism is used to reference things specifically to underscore or expand the narrative of whatever is going on in the art piece. For example, a person in a painting is just a person in the painting. But if they wear specific kinds of clothing that are indicative of status or station, and if they are holding specific gestures that are indicative of otherworldly or angelic concerns, then you can make some assumptions that this painting is used to symbolize something beyond just a person in the painting. Do those kind of three ideas make sense? Okay. And as we look at this, the best way to navigate this class is to go through, skim through each of the elements of the module before we meet as a class. And then after we meet as a class, go through, read it more carefully, and find the things that are interesting to you. Watch some of the videos, click on some of the links, check it out. And the things that are really interesting, dive deeper into them and use them as for your weekly reflection. I would like people to watch like the 5-minute videos. Ideally, that's a really good. This gives a history of the Renaissance, and watch some of them, but more than, and use them specifically to find imagery that you can use in your weekly reflection and focus more on the things that are interesting to you. So like for this, this is really an important video, and we'll watch that in just a second. So this module, when we're being introduced to the Renaissance, the things that are important are the things that have a date on them. So these are the things you need to skim by and look over before we meet. If it doesn't have a date on it, it's something that I just haven't gotten around to exiting out. You can look at it if you want, but it's not vital. These things are really pretty good to go over. Filippo Brunelleschi, uh, Giotto di Bondone. These kind of things are important because they maybe not they aren't necessarily the demigods of Renaissance. That's not necessarily why they're important, but they're important because they're an encapsulation in one individual of the kind of thinking that was so startling during this period in Italy. And we are talking primarily about Italy. Now this, if you guys want to click on this one. This one is pretty good. It does give a pretty good, well-rounded introduction to this. The reason why we're talking predominantly about Italy is because of where Italy is situated. It's in the middle of the northern Mediterranean, and it is the de facto bridge between Europe and North Africa, and essentially the Middle East, the rest of the world, essentially. And when people went on crusades, when people returned from crusades, they almost always went through Italy. So as people are going back and forth, there's a lot of money, a lot of ideas changing hands. And they ran off of warfare for centuries. And as the crusades are winding down, their thoughts start turning towards, hey, you know what? We can still make a lot of money without funneling weapons back and forth and people. Let's look into this trade idea. And Italy became the center of intellectual trade. And that's also where the church was. And the Catholic Church was the de facto religion of the time. And it's very hard to argue that anything else would have as powerful as an effect on the worldview of people in Europe than something that promised to get you in or keep you out of heaven. And but they had a lot of money as well, which funded a lot of technological development, a lot of trade, and a lot of the other development that people were going through. So that's why we're focusing in Italy for this no for the first part. But I'm going to go back here and scroll down here. This, I think, is a really good encapsulation of what is going on with the painting at this time. You do see symbolism in a lot of things leading up to this, but the symbolism is usually used as either a way of connecting the audience to what's going on in the painting or to help underscore the primary teaching of the painting. Like, for example, there is a beautiful ivory plaque that was carved for Christian consumption that tells the story of Cain and Abel. And symbolism is used so you know which figure is Cain, which figure is Abel, why Cain killing his brother is such a bad idea, and what's going on with that. So symbol was used primarily to tell the story. And in here, we see symbolism being used to expand way beyond just the story. And so I think we have 7 minutes. We're going to go ahead and watch this, if that's okay with you. And then at the end, let's talk about it. Or if you want me to pause it, we can talk about it throughout. But I really love this video because it kind of gets us into the mindset of how thinking changed for artists moving into the Renaissance and how audiences changed and became a little bit more demanding as well. Okay, Joey, I just hit a button. Can you still see the video? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, good. Andrew, I can't hear audio though. I can see it, but I can't hear it.
Now there is a lot of background voices, but that's because the recording is not filtered. It's not, the computer isn't screwing up. So can you still understand what they're saying and everything?
So I actually can't hear audio. I'm like reading it, but I can't hear it. It is
That is
subtitled.
so frustrating. Okay. All right. Instead of, I'll have people watch this by themselves, and I'm gonna get to a full screen image of the painting and I'll talk through it. Okay.
Sure.
Because if we're not getting any audio, it's not going to help. But watch this video by yourself later. The Madonna and this is Mary, the Christ mother, and this is the Christ baby. There are a couple reasons why Jesus seems to always be shown as an angry little old man, and there are reasons why she looks like death warmed over and holding her hands in really odd positions. This is, the placement is very stylized and it looks incredibly unnatural. This is very common. Now this is, right towards the early end, middle of Renaissance, but this is something that we consistently see from the tail end of the Crusades right up through the Baroque and then continuing on forward. But it's really a hallmark of the kind of thinking behind the art of a lot of Renaissance stuff. So you can tell this is a woman, you can tell this is a little individual, ideally a baby. Where the symbolism comes in is the selection of the fruits, the selection and coloring and placement of the different elements, the background, what does the background look like, the kind of clothing she's wearing, these kind of the halo, the style of clothing she's wearing. Now, one thing that kind of frustrates me is this thing that emerges every once in a while. People think our ancestors are dumb, and our ancestors weren't. People at this time knew very well that Mary did not wear clothing like this. The historical person of Mary wore stuff that was historically accurate to the time period she was born in. Duh. Everybody knew that. But painters, especially when they're doing things that they want people to relate to, and sculptors, everybody like that, will do things specifically targeting what the viewing audience is comfortable with. So you can find personal association and connection with the subject matter of the painting, with the people in there. So Mary is wearing clothes that are recognizably consistent with what people see every day with the upper class, upper crusty type people. That's why she has a wimple. That's why she has this kind of forehead chain. That's why she's wearing these kinds of robes. That's why he has this little darling tunic right there and all that kind of stuff. The skin pallor looks really uncomfortable, and the way that she's holding her neck, painters knew this is not what normal people look like. But they would do things where, person in a religious painting, particularly a saint, would hold their head at a specific angle. And it's almost always the same angle that you notice as you look at different paintings. And this angle denotes reverence or deference to God. Because they're in the prayer posture kind of thing. And a lot of the times that angle is going to be reflective of the declination of the pull of the earth, the way that the earth tilts on its axis too. Not all the time, a lot of the times that is a reference, which I think is just kind of wild. But you see, nobody holds their hand like this unless they're posing for a photo. The reason why she looks kind of oddly distorted is because, and the skin is pallorous, is because they want you to know she is not a normal, ordinary mortal. She is in this kind of liminal realm where she's halfway between heaven and earth. And this kind of gives it literally an otherworldly feel. That's where that part of the symbolism comes in. And the baby, everybody knew what babies look like. Jesus is depicted as an angry old man a lot of the times in this type of painting because of a doctrine that was taught in the Catholic Church, that Jesus was conceived with all the knowledge and perfection that he had as an adult. You know, he didn't look like an adult when he was born, but these kind of distorted babies, it places him in that extra mortal kind of realm, and also kind of reminds you of this idea that Jesus was always perfect from the point of conception. And these kinds of things, notice the material of these halos, they're gold, precious gemstones. Her halo may not look like this. This is actually the Christian halo that was being used here is a cross between the hypocephalus, which is a card, a round card that Egyptian mummies were buried with, that had prayers to get through the afterlife, fusing that with this idea of the brightness that's surrounding the holy person's head, that really started coming into people's imaginations from Islam. You know, when you don't see an awful lot of halos before this, you see something like an aura around the whole person. It's usually an almond shape called the mandorla. And as people were coming back from the Crusades, this idea of the round, hard halo came up more and more often. You know, they saw the hypocephalus in Egypt. They saw this kind of bright shining disc, or bright shining fire and flame in Islam, and both of them come together to help this idea along. Anyway, what's the difference between Jesus's halo and Mary's halo? They're
He
both
has
gold.
a,
What's that?
I said he has a cross.
Yeah. And what color is the cross?
It's red.
Yeah, that is off the color that is associated with Jesus. Red is the color of blood, it's the color of sacrifice. What color is this specifically?
Lavender. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a purple. Purple and red are colors associated with the blood of sacrifice, royalty, and Jesus. So the fact that Mary has this behind her lets you know she is the Queen of Heaven. She's the Empress of Heaven. So she's a very powerful person. And notice that right here, what color is this?
Green.
Yeah. Mary will be shown wearing colors like green and blue a lot of the times. Blue is primarily her color, but she's also associated with green. So those just, and there is a whole school that iconographers would be trained in, so that they could identify people that they're painting just by the things that they're holding, just by the colors they're around with, just by the style of halo that they have. Because and they're called the attributes of the saints, is what they're called. So there's a whole bunch of symbolism. And notice the floral pattern here. There's gold stitched into this blue fabric, so you know it's costly. Mary most likely did not have clothes like this, but you're being told she is upper crust. She is a woman. She's an empress. She is the queen of heaven. Gold flowers. This design is something that reminds us of the Middle East, you know, kind of Muslim design. And she was from Jerusalem, those kind of areas. So this ties us uh, um, cartographically with being from that area. Doesn't have anything to do with being in the right time. That is completely unimportant. But these are clues that an individual, the audience contemporary to this, would it would help feed their understanding of where she comes from. And notice the landscape back here. If you blow this up, you actually see these two people here, this person here, they're all wearing turbans. The turban was not super common in Jerusalem among Jews when she was alive. But this kind of landscape, it looks kind of vaguely Eastern. It looks fantastical. So you know she's in a different realm than what we're used to. This is not Italy anymore. And wearing these kind of clothes places her again somewhere in this mystical Middle East. We look at the fruits right here. We have a cucumber and we have apples. The apple is associated with the divine feminine. If you cut an apple horizontally, hold it up and look at it, you see the five seeds going around. It's a pentagonal design, and that matches the petals. If you trace Venus in the sky, where it goes in the sky, it'll make a five-petaled flower over the course of a couple of years. And so this idea of five is a very significant attachment to the divine feminine or the sacred feminine. Uh, it became very heavily associated with the original sin, implicating that Eve tempting Adam with sex was the original sin. Um, at about the time, I'm going to say about 12th, 13th century, as Hildegard von Bingen and the abbesses were starting to lose power, there was this uh, process in the church where they were underscoring the idea that priests should be celibate, because before then, priests had, wives and families a lot of the times. Um, uh, if we go back even earlier, they had them a lot, but that became codified that a priest had to be celibate at about this time that the abbesses were losing power, and this fruit of the divine feminine was associated with original sin. But it is interesting, we have that there, and we have the counterpoint, holding this little bird. Small birds particularly, like starlings, represent innocence. And this is particular is a goldfinch. Little birds like this are in folk tradition were considered to be prayer carriers. In some of the really ancient pagan traditions, birds would carry prayers to the gods. And then we also see Jesus as a young child in the infancy gospels. Uh, and people didn't know about the infancy gospels necessarily, but they would be familiar with these kinds of stories, that Jesus would cared so much about these little birds that after storms, rainstorms, he'd go outside, the 2-year-old, 3-year-old Jesus, and would gather up these baby birds that had died and resurrect them. This is from the infancy gospels that were started being written and shared in story form about 5th, 6th century. So these are folk traditions that people have. We look over here, we have a cucumber. If the apple represents the divine feminine, what do you think the cucumber represents?
It's got to be a dude.
Yep, the divine masculine. So for very obvious reasons, and we won't say anything more about that. But it's interesting that they are together here. You have the divine feminine, the divine masculine. She represents the fulfillment and perfection of the divine feminine. He represents the fulfillment and the perfection of the divine masculine. You have the fruit that's earmarking the original sin, and you have the tiny bird representing ultimate atonement, overcoming original sin. And everybody knew that Jesus wasn't a baby his whole life. Everybody knew he wasn't an adult his whole life. He had a lifespan just like everybody else. But this image is so powerful because it represents the function in a non-sexual way of the unification and fulfillment of the divine feminine, divine masculine, original sin, ultimate atonement, these things coming together. The mortality of humankind and the ultimate fulfillment and exaltation of mortals through Christ. And it's interesting when the Prophet Muhammad, about 800 years before this painting was made, when he went through and cleansed the Kaaba in Mecca, because the Kaaba was used as a storehouse for all the pagan artifacts. He cleaned everything out except for one painting, and that one painting was of Mary holding the baby Jesus. So that's the Prophet Muhammad of Islam, thinking this image was so wonderfully powerful. So anyway, I think so. There's a lot to unpack in there, but can you see how heavily they rely on symbolism, not just to make their paintings more interesting and entertaining, but to really connect with an audience, to connect with it almost feels like it's a conversation, a philosophical conversation that they're having with us as we see these kinds of things. And this really is the conscious intention of the use of symbolism in Renaissance work really becomes a hallmark of Renaissance artwork. That is true of all sorts of different stuff. So I'd like everybody go through, look at each of these links and at least look at what's going on. And I'm gonna just show you what one of this looks like. We're not gonna watch the video, but it will give you an indication. I love Smart History because um, they have art historians talking about this stuff. But what Giotto did in this chapel is this is the layout. All of these panels are paintings, and all these paintings are from Bible stories and folk tradition that underscore principles vital both to a person's process of redemption through the church, as well as a powerful reminder of how important governmental officials were to help you feel more patriotic, to help you feel like you belong in the community that you are. There, politics is tied directly to the vitality of the spiritual presence of the church. And each of these videos talk about what Giotto was able to do with these different paintings. So look through that and definitely watch these. Now he was a painter, and Brunelleschi, he did a lot of stuff. Um, he was a champion storyteller, and supposedly he was also a dancer and a poet. But he is most well known or remembered because of his architecture. You've heard the term Renaissance man. What does Renaissance man mean?
It's a somebody who's expert in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, exactly. And that term exists because these people that we remember from the Renaissance were people that, yeah, they did have a lot of money backing them for a lot of the time, but the Renaissance person was somebody that needed to be able to entertain as well as provide and protect. And so the men and women were well read, brutally intelligent. Some of the exchanges among women, you think that the real lives of housewives TV shows today where they're brutally sarcastic to each other. You think that that's nasty? It has nothing on these Italian women during the Renaissance. They knew how to glance at somebody to tear them apart. I mean, these ladies could be ruthless, but they could also save whole towns just because of a kind word to the right person. They're incredibly, incredibly intelligent. They the Renaissance woman was somebody who was conversant in three languages. Most likely, uh, if they're upper class, they most likely did know how to read and write. Probably Latin and Greek, most likely. Um, she probably didn't do a lot of her own cooking, but she could tell right away when somebody else could cook or not because she knew how to do it herself. But she didn't need to. She could make clothes. She could make a lot of that kind of soap. You put her in the middle of um, a prairie somewhere, and she could build a household. She didn't need to because she had the money to have other people do that for her, but she knew how to do it. Men, one of the stories is about I don't remember if it was Brunelleschi or um, Giotto could stand on the ground and jump and land upright on a table. So he had a vertical leap of at least 32 inches. Um, Da Vinci had a standing broad jump of something like 12 feet. So they could dance, they could recite poetry. These are the guys that would memorize things like works like the Iliad or the contemporary things just for fun. And they knew math. And what was so amazing about Filippo Brunelleschi, he didn't have the benefits of organized education, he is pretty much like, somebody like Colonel Sanders, who taught himself a lot of stuff. He taught himself architecture, he taught himself the math, he taught himself the engineering necessary to create these buildings. And this kind of stuff is just phenomenal. Now, remember, people are coming back from the Crusades with all these stories of tremendously gigantic buildings, like the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, the Blue Mosque that later on, oh no, that would be after this time, never mind. Um, but the Hagia Sophia was gigantic, and Brunelleschi and his ilk were trying to figure out how they could, with the tools they have, build something that was so huge, and they succeeded. You look at the Gothic architecture. Instead of using uh, interior buttresses like what Constantine had his architects build work with, they used exterior buttresses. Instead of using one kind of stone, they used other kinds of stone. They used wood and different things like that instead of brick and other things. But they were able to come to very similar solutions because they were using their brains. Now, this kind of dome, we look at this general arc right here. This window is about 6 feet high. This is probably about 40 feet from right here down to here. And all this is going to be about 6, 7 stories tall. And you're doing this in a time period where people aren't still are the only flush toilets that people are using right now is in the Middle East and North Africa. Nobody else has flush toilets, and so they have a relatively low level of technology like what we're used to, but they're using what they have and they're making magnificent things with it. And I want you to look at this too, the way that they've decorated this. Um, I don't know if you remember any of the Muslim stuff we looked at in 2710, towards the end of the class. There were a lot of things like decorative mosaics on the outside of buildings and things like that. They, there were decorative paintings, decorative mosaics on the outside, but you have a lot of rain. They're still working with the technology of painting on things so it looks permanent. And I think in order or one of the successes that they came up with to activate in the exterior of a building was to make things that didn't respond and melt in rain. So you have this kind of paneling where it's basically very simple white stone with black embellishments, but this is very typical of Italian Renaissance, where you get this kind of energy going on. And you see something very interesting showing up in Mughal India as well at about the same time period. So I think there was some communication back and forth because people have the communication, have the technology to actually go back and forth to India several times in a single lifetime, or to travel around the world in a single lifetime. And so there's a lot of really exciting stuff. We also see right here, you see this dome right here. What really old culture does that style of dome make you think of?
I mean, it's classical as a Greek.
Yeah, it looks very like that Roman style. Yeah, the Roman style dome or arch rather. And then
Or
you get the Carolingian triangle roof right there. And you get this, it's this again, we go to that 72 degrees of the Roman style slanted roof right there. And right here, we get an 8-sided octagon, which is what Muslims were using quite a bit. So this kind of harkens back to maybe the Dome of the Rock. I don't know if that was any influence, but what is so amazing about this octagon is not a perfect octagon. It doesn't meet in a perfect octagon right up here. But what Brunelleschi did was able to create the largest dome, the tallest dome in Italy with these materials without a formal education, without a formal training. And he designed this so well that even though the lines aren't all perfect, the lines aren't all exact. All the measurements aren't exact. He was able to use a plot of land that he was given and create something that looks perfect. I mean, it looks beautiful. And this thing has lasted for like 700 years. And it is astounding. Here's a shot of the inside. So the things that are amazing about this is he is able to, the Gothic architecture, they built these tall spires that had all these buttresses and everything going inside. Brunelleschi is able to create a really tall dome where it is able to support its own weight, just like the Hagia Sophia. And nobody else has done this in Italy at the time. That's why it's so amazing. But definitely watch this video where they talk about this, and just keep your eye open for those things like what you talk about, the reflection of the Greek, like this style of roof, the 72 degrees started with the Etruscans. The Greeks used it all the time in their temples. The Romans picked it up, shows it up again here. These arches, we're familiar with that with Greek and Roman eras. And then this is that Carolingian 3-point triangle, the equilateral triangle. Now, one of the things you've heard me talk about it a little bit with, the assumption that our ancestors were dumb. One of the things that the Renaissance is really targeted for providing is this idea of perspective, particularly lineal perspective. And people say, well, that's why it's so accurate. That's why all this stuff is going on, because this is the first time people are smart enough to be able to do that. I really don't think that that's true. I think that what is true is we have the most evidence surviving from this time period where people were actively using this, and they were using it because it became important to them. I think that's why lineal perspective shows up. Um, when before the Renaissance, it was important to indicate that there was a structural space. It was important to indicate in a visual plane that there was some sort of um, uh, cartographical reference or geographical reference through architectural ornaments that were displayed in the painting itself. It was not important that the architecture be structurally sound. And you can see that in a lot of the visual depictions of architecture um, up to this point all around the world. The idea of architecture is a lot more important than whether the architectural is factually rendered. It's not because people didn't know how to do that. People have been making blueprints and plans for centuries. It's because when you know that the paintings, the imagery is going to be consumed by a mass broad spectrum of humanity, you get out the important thing that is important to them for them to know. So it's the fact that it's architecture. It's the fact that it takes place in the Middle East, not that it's factually rendered. And at about this time, this is when these Renaissance architects, I'm not going to say they were a dime a dozen, but people knew it was a good gig. And so there was competition. This is at the time period where you start seeing contracts made where um, somebody will contract with a painting from a studio where they know the 3 or 4 artists are in the studio, but they also know that this artist is a big deal. So in the contract, they'll say, yeah, but I'm only going to pay this if 20% of the painting is done by this guy. Yeah, or I'm only going to pay this amount if you use this much lapis in the blue pigment. And people like Michelangelo really thrived on the idea of cult of personality. And he was like the Prince and Michael Jackson of his day, because he would almost perform and make himself the important element as Michelangelo, as opposed to being just a really good artist. So that people would come to his studio because then Michelangelo's name is associated to it, and they pay the big bucks to have written in their contract that Michelangelo actually painted 20% of this or touched the stone 17 times. And if that sounds absurd, I mean, you look at somebody today like Dale Chihuly, who I think is single-handedly responsible for revitalizing glassblowing as an art form in North America. But in his own studio, the fact that it's in his studio, you pay money for it. If he decides to look in the room where they're making the stuff while they're making it, you pay more. If one of the sketches that he made was on the table while the guy's blowing the glass, you pay more. And if he comes through and taps it with a stick while the glass is cooling, you pay a lot more because he's been able to develop the same kind of cult of personality. But, saying all that, different artists would do different things to make sure that people knew that they were amazing. And I think with the lower cost of paper, the lower cost of art supplies too, because they were more in demand, more people were producing them, then you have more evidence surviving of things like this, fantastic expressions of mathematical placement of geometry, where these guys are recording the experiments they did in lineal perspectives so we can see them later on. And these are used as teaching devices for other people. And so I don't think lineal perspective was developed here, but it does take off in a huge way because all those things tying together support it taking off in a huge way. And it becomes really important. This is also when you start seeing a real active application of lineal perspective and plausible architecture in this kind of mosaic space where or a painted interior painted space. You see this kind of stuff in Pompeii, in Mycenae, in ancient Greece, all that. But this is where you really start seeing people do interior painting, interior mosaics as plausible architectural spaces. And this becomes not just interior decoration, but almost an extension of the living space in a lot of these Italian buildings. And so this really took off in Renaissance world as well. And Brunelleschi was one of the fairy godfathers where people were being taught what lineal perspective could do so you could make plausible interior decorations and really become popular, be sought after as an artist, being able to apply this stuff so that it was essentially not just plausible, but it looked like, oh, what is the French word, Joey, for the fabricated space that the French were so good at? Um,
Trompe
what's that? Trompe l'oeil. Yeah, yes, absolutely. This is the trompe l'oeil interior painting. So yeah. And so you get a transition from these kinds of ethereal imagery into much more plausible human type spaces because that was what became culturally important. And so it's not because people didn't know how to do it before, it was because now it started becoming culturally relevant. And you can see photorealistic paintings in Egyptian tomb paintings that are 3,000 years old. You see photorealistic bronze sculptures like we saw in the Ife Kingdom, the Nigerian bronzes that are 2,000 years old. But now it becomes culturally relevant, and that's why you start seeing so much more of it. This is very typical of the Italian Renaissance style. We can see this kind of we can see this kind of decoration on the outside where you have the dark line. It was either black or red with these white panels. And we see a repetition of the Roman style arch, the Etruscan style roof, you know, or Roman style roof, Greek style, it's all that kind of stuff. And then one of the things that really sold a lot of Brunelleschi's designs is he was able to do renderings in such a way so that the person wasn't just seeing one face or another face, but he could apply what he learned and taught himself about 3-point perspective so people could get a really entertaining view of what this thing might look like. And I just think it's amazing the kinds of stuff that he came up with. Now, this is a something that people think maybe helped them do this, but this is based on awareness of optics about the camera obscura. And do you remember there was an article about the allegory of the cave that Plato wrote. Somebody felt was a demonstration that people knew about this kind of photo technology at the time of Plato. So, 2,500 years ago, because when Plato is talking about the cave and describing it, it is a really good description of the early large scale camera obscura type things that were done almost as entertainment for rooms, and became a popular attraction during the Renaissance.
Mm.
Anyways, I just think stuff like that is kind of exciting.
That's cool.
And so I want you to skim over this stuff, but also target each of these. I want you to target like one or a couple videos, look at, particularly pay attention to the smart art videos. I think that those are the best. And then we go to Michelangelo and Leonardo. We talk about this a little bit. We are not talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and hopefully anybody over 50 will understand that. If you're not over 50, good for you. But what this is, I'm going to show you this unbelievable technology that was developed by stonemasons. And this has its direct relevance to the ivory and stonework that was done right around the time of the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. That technology transferred over to, we can see that emerging in Turkey and the Middle East. And then after the Crusades, the awareness of what's possible comes back to Italy. And then when you get these people that are trying to one up each other on showing off what they can do, and it wasn't that selfish. I think people were just finally allowed an opportunity. Don't make stuff just for warfare, make stuff that's truly beautiful. This is when all those technologies come together. People know what's possible and just push the envelope as rapidly as they can. And this is the Pieta, Michelangelo's Pieta, which is one of the most beautiful sculptures in the history of the universe. What he's able to do was not approached again until about 400 years later. And I'm going to try to see if we can find a really close up picture. Okay. The Pieta is the mother, as Mary, the mother of Christ. This time she's not acting as Madonna and child, she's acting as Madonna and the very dead Christ. She's, as a mother, she is holding her dead son, her baby boy, just after he's been pulled off the cross. Now, we look at this. This is all hand chiseled stone, people. This was sawn out of a block of marble and then chiseled with metal chisels and a hammer. And that's what was used. This is life size. So Jesus is actually 6 foot tall. This is life size woman holding him. Look at how thin this is right here. Look at the folds of cloth. Does this look plausible and believable? What I find so astounding is you can see the indentations in Jesus's dead flesh where his mom's finger presses into it. You can see his slack muscles as they push against her thighs, holding him up. You can see her body pushing against the folds of cloth underneath, and it feels like cloth. This is absolutely astounding. Now, what would happen is Michelangelo would design it. He would do a maquette, probably out of plaster. He'd have his people, they would find marble. He would give the last say on, yeah, we're going to use this block of marble. His people would carve it out, saw the chunks out. And every step of the way, he would look at it, make sure, and he would have his underlings take the big chunks out. And then he would go in and do the detail. This is astonishing to me. This is hand done. It's not CAD CAM. It's not digital. Nothing about it is AI enhanced. This is what Michelangelo actually did. Like it blows my mind away. No flush toilets, and he did this. So spend some reverent time watching this video and learning about the Pieta, please. It is absolutely astonishing. You know, one of the real Renaissance men was Leonardo da Vinci. He could cut up the dance floor. He could arm wrestle anybody. He loved wrestling. He was also a supreme mathematician. He was apparently a ladies' man too. Um, he did all sorts of stuff. And this Mona Lisa, if you guys watch Doctor Who, you know that he actually painted six of the Mona Lisa paintings. Um, but the idea of the Reverend Madonna is, you know, the celebration of the divine feminine is something that shows up over and over again, where you have a woman who's usually recognized as an important woman in a prominent household being celebrated as an embodiment of the feminine divine. And that's why Mona Lisa holds the that's why she's in the pose that she's in. You know, very very reposed, very significant looking. And Michelangelo did a lot of things. A lot of things that he did were experiments as well. A lot of stuff that he did was successful, but a lot of stuff that he did sucked. We don't hear about any of that, but he was so prolific that even the stuff that sucked survived and is amazing. You know, he did the Last Supper, and anybody who watched what's the Da Vinci Code, I would recommend if you guys want extra credit, watch the Da Vinci Code, apply the four tools of artistic critique to it, and share it with the class. That'd be awesome. One of the frustrating things for a lot of people is that the painting was done as an experiment. He was so frustrated that when you painted into plaster, you could only do about a square foot at a time. So he developed a plaster that was a lot slower drying, and he developed carriers for his pigments that were designed to dry in sequence with a slower time of that slow drying plaster. What that meant was this painting is constantly falling apart. People are constantly restoring it. And a lot of the mysteries around uh, the painting and, you know, this actually a woman that was painted or a boy, you know, this kind of stuff. A lot of those were given a lot of fuel because of poorly trained attempts to restore the painting, you know, or to clean it with the wrong chemicals. And by using subsurface spectrography, they've been able to get a much better idea of what this painting actually looked like. But Leonardo da Vinci was an engineer. He also he knew about agriculture. He was a mathematician. All these things are amazing. Uh, this this single drawing is fantastic because he is able in this drawing is able to demonstrate what the golden ratio was, what it looks like, what it is in relationship to architecture, and he shows you how to draw a circle and a square so that their perimeters are identical, which was something that is was very difficult to do. And if you guys are interested in that in a month or so, I'll show it to you. And of course, Mona Lisa, a lot of has been said about this, but you know, the painting is tiny. I really like a lot of the things that he had to say too. He was a brilliant individual, but he survives not because necessarily he was a super genius, because he was, but he survives because he was so prolific. And I really look at this video. I recommend this last one. Very much watch this one. It deals with sacred geometry. And then we go into the weekly reflection. Talked a little bit about that. Most important elements of weekly reflection. Pick one of the things that really struck you through the entire module. And then in your reflection, show an image of that thing, plus show your use of the four tools of artistic critique. And those four tools are describe, analyze, um, interpret, and evaluate. I don't know if you can see the four fingers. And then on this version, I gave a sample layout. Now, I've really gone on quite a bit. I wanted to share this with people. I got some feedback on the last thing, in the last class I did about this that was really pretty good. I want to just introduce this idea to you, and I'm going to clarify it, and then I'll email it to people and we'll talk about it next week. But for one of your discovery projects, I'm suggesting that you can use AI to help you. And you use an AI image generator that allows you to input images. What I want you to do is find three examples of an art movement that you want to do, or three examples from an artist that you like. Be able to articulate what's important about that. You're going to generate a prompt for your AI to create something that's completely unique from your um, observations about what makes those three images indicative of that artist or that art movement. You're going to have your AI generate something using your input. You're going to discuss why it works or not, revise the prompt, have it generate a second one, and then talk about why that's important, or why that is valid or better or worse or whatever. And I hope this sounds interesting to you. I will work it out and produce an example for everybody so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But I thought this would be fascinating as a way to incorporate AI into a discovery project. Does that sound interesting, Joey?
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. I'm sitting there racking my brain for different ideas I can have with that. But
Because I was thinking you could input three different things from um, like Arthur Rackham and his book illustration, three different images. Say, well, and tell AI, these are the things that I think are important and consistent with what he does. Could you generate a brand new image for me? And then see how AI kind of pick it apart with the four tools of artistic critique and see if it does fit in and looks like another Arthur Rackham painting or NC Wyeth or Cubism or any of these kinds of movements. I think that that would be fascinating. So I will work on that. I will put together an example of this assignment for everybody, email and everybody, and then we'll look at it on Tuesday, next Tuesday. So I know that was kind of rapid fire, a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. But before we close or wrap things up, any observations or questions about the stuff that you've come across so far?
um yeah, so I had a good time going through all the videos. I think I went through everything but Da Vinci. So I'm saving those ones. But I was really blown away with I cannot ever say his name. Brunelleschi. How do you say his name?
Actually, that's it.
Yeah, so in building that dome, just absolutely incredible to think about. I have a lot of stupid ideas, and I don't ever get to make them and like bring them into real life. And so to go from idea like, hey, I think I could do this, and then to go to execution, it was talking about how he even had to invent a special kind of barge that could bring the materials he
Right.
needed,
Yeah.
and he had to invent machinery to like get materials up to that dome. It's really incredible.
Well, he had to invent special gearing for the cranes, and on all this kind of stuff. And it is astounding to me because what makes it so remarkable is that he grew up in a society that essentially told him you can't do this.
Yeah.
And he figured out a way to do it anyway. I say, well, you can't make something this big. Well, I'm going to make it this big. We can't make it in these materials. Okay, I'll find materials that I can make it in.
Yeah.
You can't do this. You can't get it from here. You can't do that. So okay, well, find a way to do it anyway. And I love that because one of the things I see that's different from about the Renaissance from previous art periods is we get this convergence of people that give themselves permission to do the stupid thing.
Yeah.
That other people that give themselves permission to support the guy doing the stupid thing. But they've seen these magnificent, they've heard these fantastical stories about other stuff. And they think, okay, well, somebody somewhere did it. Why can't it be possible? And then on top of that, Italy by this time is so sick of constant warfare that they find it so much more profitable to make friends with people and trade with them. I love the fact that channeling that constructive energy away from warfare into let's do something fantastic that people will come and see. Let's do something fantastic that we can tell everybody about. Let's do something fantastic that everybody wants to come here. I love seeing that rechanneling of energy into something that is so constructive and ultimately beneficial. And I think that's what marks the Renaissance as being so um, profoundly creative. I, that's just conjecture on my part, but it seems. What do you think?
Yeah, no,
Does that
I
seem
agree.
consistent?
Yeah, I think that's what struck me so much about it was it's more of like just why can't that be possible?
Right. Yeah.
And seeing like what like how far you can push things. Like, again, it feels like taking a flag into the wilderness to see how far you can put your stake in the ground and say, okay, we've come this far now.
Yeah.
It's really like I don't know, for some reason that one really struck me the most of like, oh, this is actually just like really pushing the needle. It's moving the needle of what's
Right.
possible.
Yeah. And he was considered to be an idiot for trying, you know, but he did it anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I love that.
yeah, yeah, cool, really
Well,
cool.
well, thank you. Thank you for joining me. Um, I am really hoping this says it's recording. Everything should be working just fine. If it doesn't work, I will um, figure out what's going on. I may have to record a new video for this. I hope not. But what I'm going to be doing is everybody that comes on these things live, I'm going to be opening up the attendance with a little thing that is a placeholder for the video. So if you came live, you can go ahead and get your attendance points. And there'll be a recording. As soon as I upload it, there'll be a recording for everybody else. So, but thank you so much for showing up. Woody Allen said, 96% of success is showing up. So I'm glad that you're in the 96%.
Yes.
All
Yeah, so I
right.
don't need to do 5 questions. I don't need to do 5 things.
Well, yeah, you still need to do the five
Okay.
things. I opened it up, but it's from your live experience as opposed to checking out the video.
Oh, okay, very cool. Yeah,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I'm going to stop recording now, but thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you Tuesday. Oh, and be safe on Labor Day.
Oh, oh yeah, Labor Day. Yeah, cool. Thank you.